This is Long Way to the Top, and I'm your host, Shane Bryan. In the words of the immortal AC/DC, it is harder than it looks. These interviews will give you a glimpse into the lives of the artists that we've sung along with, danced and rocked out to. Some go deep into their past and others celebrate their recent releases. But all of them show that regardless of who you are, it's always a long way to the top. In the early 80s, a new breed of music came out of the punk scene in the UK called New Wave. It was fronted by bands like Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, Human League, Devo and ABC. By 1982-83, the British invasion was well underway, and in Australia, shows like Countdown embraced it, and new wave bands became a regular on the show. Well, there was nothing like it in Australia. We had pub rock bands like Chisel and experimental bands like Split Enz. We were waiting for a new wave act to hit the scene that could match the UK invasion. And then there was a beat for us, and we were suddenly listening to Pseudo Echo. Mr. Brian Canham, Mr. Pseudo Echo himself, joins us on the show. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks, Shane. How are you going?
Yeah, pretty good. You guys were the first. I mean, really, weren't you?
There was a couple on the block at the time, but I guess we were one of the first to really to appeal to the masses and get on Countdown and get away with it.
Yeah, and because that was a massive thing, and this is one thing that I really wanted to talk with you about too, because there's a lot of bands, especially around that time, that were brand new, unsigned, and I guess that they were looking for their break, and Countdown was really a big break for a lot of bands.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I mean, look, for me, I grew up watching the show and aspiring to be a pop star, and be on a show like that, and which every band did in those days, and to realize it had such a captive audience and it had such power, and we got on there, and all of a sudden, instead of just a couple of hundred people in Melbourne knowing about the band, all of a sudden a couple of million people knew about the band. And, they had to have Molly, wave your flag for you and say he liked it. And that was a pretty good start for you.
But you knew of Molly, or you knew Molly because you were part of the music scene in Melbourne, the club scene, yeah?
Yeah, well, I knew Molly from when I was just in my late teens. And I used to go to a club in the northern suburbs called the Croc. And Molly used to DJ there. I'd go there every Thursday night, and I used to go just to check out what he was playing. I liked sort of gauging this new music he'd play, because he played great music. And I'd just gauge what he was playing, and I'd make note of the beat and the bass and the progressions of the song and what got the crowd jumping. And so he probably knew me because I was this little guy who used to just sit on the sidelines next to his DJ booth and sort of just really watch and listen. and somebody once did an intro for me, and he just said hey, and he was friendly and all that. And then it wasn't until some years later that somebody tipped him off about this new band, Pseudo Echo. You got to check them out. So he comes along, and then lo and behold, it's the little kid who sits next to him in the DJ booth. He was really taken aback when he realized who the singer of the band was.
And I guess, for him to even say, hey, why don't you come on Countdown?
Oh,
incredible. Explain how you felt at that point.
Well, he just appeared at this gig, and there was no intro. We didn't know anything about it. So we saw him, and then thought, holy hell, Molly Meldrum's in the crowd, and, the crowd was going off. It was a good night. And he came backstage, a big posse with him, and started chatting to us. And he realised, he goes, "I know you. You're the guy who used to sit there every Thursday night."
Oh, that annoyed me at the DJ desk.
So he was really, I really took me under his wing, and I think he was really taken aback. And then he just said, "Hey, what's going on? Have you guys, anybody sniffing around with a record deal or anything like that?" And he was kind of surprised that we were quite humble and hadn't really, we said, "Oh, we haven't even looked for a record deal. We haven't, sent tapes out or anything." So he says, "Look, you guys need to be on Countdown." And we're like, "Yeah, of course," yeah. But he didn't actually ask us that night. He just sort of mentioned something about, you need to be on there, or, give me another tape of what you've got, your latest stuff. And so we handed him another cassette. And it was the next week he called our manager and said, look, I'm gonna get the guys on Countdown. And so we couldn't believe it. It was so like it's every band's dream, And so the ABC were fantastic. They all moonlighted on a weeknight or something and came in after hours, set up a set for us with all props and things, and we did a little sort of lip sync to the track that we recorded. We did a bit more polished version of our first demo, and they kind of cut together a little mini clip, and then that was what Molly introduced us on Countdown with that clip.
Right. So it wasn't live. It was
That's right. It was like a mini clip, basically. A low budget looking clip, but it looked great because we just used all the station's props and stage lights, and the crew were really enthusiastic, and I think they all took us under their wing too, and they felt like we're breaking this new band, and and so by the time Molly gave this big fanfare about us, and everybody check them out, new record companies, you don't open your eyes and open your ears and listen to this band. So it was a great intro for us, and within a month or so we were seriously negotiating deals with different labels and seeing who was gonna put the cards on the table.
Wow. I mean, if we look back now and at bands that are up and coming, and there really is nothing like that for a band these days, is there?
That's right. It's really hard now. I mean, look, to some respect, you've got, streaming music that anybody can really get their music up on the platform, but there's so much, and how do you find it, and who's going to find it? So, having that sort of dominant show that was so powerful and had a captive audience, and it was on both nights, Saturday and Sunday. So there was I think the new program was on the Sunday, but the Saturday would be a repeat of the show before. So you really got 2 weeks. You really got your money's worth. And so it was fantastic. Somebody missed it on the Sunday, they catch it the next week on the Saturday. And so you're getting this real saturation, like even if your single was crap and didn't go anywhere, you still got 2 nights on prime time TV. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I guess I'm going through the same process with a friend of mine, Randall Waller, who you may know. He was the lead singer of Avion. I think he was around at the time when you were coming out as well. He's back to, new album. What do I do? How do I get it out there? I mean, it's a hard slog for any artist, regardless of whether they're new or old.
Because I mean, how are you going to find 2 million people or 3 million people to listen to your music in one hit?
Yeah. Now, I mean, ironically, your song was called "Listening." Did you realize at the time that it was going to become such a big hit for you?
Not really. No, we didn't even favor that song. We just had a bunch of pop songs, and Molly even said, when he said, "I want you to come on Countdown," he said, just choose whichever one of your songs you want to go on. He wasn't partial to anyone in particular. And we said, okay, we think this one, this is kind of the most poppy kind of tune. And he knew it. He knew from the original demo, and he said, yeah, that's a great song. But he said, all your songs are great. So, you just go with the one you want to go with. So it was random that we just went with that. So when we eventually signed to EMI, obviously they were going to go with the song that we debuted. So they said, that's going to be the single, and then it became the official single, and then Countdown was stoked to debut the initial original video clip, the official video. So we really got a good run on that first song on Countdown.
Yeah. Now you obviously your first album, which was Autumnal Park. Did I pronounce that right? Everyone pronounces it completely different. Autumnal. Yeah, it's one of those. It's like, okay, that album, that's
uses
great.
that anyway.
Where did that come from?
Oh, it's a lovely autumnal day.
Yeah. I'm not even going to ask how that even came about, but that spawned quite a few songs. Of obviously Listening, Beat for You. Another great song that you guys came up with. What was your inspiration, I guess, with the music that you were writing at that time? I mean, where was that coming from?
Well, it was definitely the UK invasion, like bands like Ultravox, Simple Minds, Tube Army, Human League, Japan. Early Japan was a big influence. Duran Duran, Spandau, all those new romantic, new wave English bands they were prominently on my radar. And I was going from being a teenager who was into Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix to this transformation, because I just knew that music had sort of run its course. And I thought, there's so many bands playing this style that how are you going to ever have something of your own? So when somebody introduced me to it, I can't remember, some peers that I had at the time, a couple of hipsters, must have said, have a listen to these guys, or have a listen to the singer on this band, and, listen to the keyboards on this. So, the first thing we did was buy some keyboards, because it was everyone played basic drums or guitar. So we just said, we need keyboards. And so, bass player, you're going to play your bass on synth now. And, he didn't even know how to play keyboard. So he's there like this, figuring it out. And then the other guys, he's got a couple of hands this way and that way. He was a guitarist, Tony, and he's playing keyboards. And it was a real experimentation, and then we'd listen to these bands and we go, listen to these sounds. So when we got those keyboards, we bought a few Rolands, and which are now, they're all iconic keyboards now, Roland, JP8, Prophet 5, Oberheim 8, OB8. And, we were just mesmerized by these cool sounds in the synths, just when you bought them. And then we started to learn. I was obsessed with the sound modeling, and I used to just mess around with it days on days, just remembering where things were and how it affected the sound. And this was right on the edge of technology where you could save the sounds, because prior to that you couldn't. You set a sound up, and if you want another sound, you have to twiddle all the knobs again and get the other sound. So they weren't real practical to base your whole sound on these keyboards. But at the start of the 80s, they invented the memory patches, so you could just go, I'm storing that sound, then make another one, I'm storing that in here and here. And then at a flick of a button, you had this fantastic sound you just made. And so that was really the biggest part of our production. It was a huge influence on our sound.
Yeah, and so much so that the name Pseudo Echo is actually a setting on the synth.
That's right. So ironically, that was one of the older synths that we had, and today an absolute classic, an ARP Odyssey, and it was just a little duophonic keyboard, which when you could sound two keys at a time, and it was predominantly used for soloing and main riffs, and we had one of those, and that didn't have the memories in it. You couldn't store the memories; you had to manually do the sounds. So we'd be reading the manual a lot and trying to work out, what's a good starting point. And it would give you some example sounds. And as we were flicking through, our keyboard player sitting on the ground in the rehearsal room, he's looking through the pages, and we're saying, so what are we going to call ourselves? And as he opens the next page, he says, how about Pseudo Echo? I think he said Pseudo Echo Machine, because that was the name of the sound. And we said, Pseudo Echo sounds fantastic. We didn't know even meant at that time, and we just said, it's got a good sounds like really current and fresh and edgy, so let's just go with that. And we thought it was kind of cool. It was from the manual of the synth we first got.
It was, and it's better than other bands, one of which we will talk about a little bit later on that you produced, Chocolate Starfish, but we won't go there.
No.
Now You've been pretty critical, I've got to say, of your songwriting on your first album. In fact, I think you were quoted by saying that you can't even listen to the words.
Well, I've done a bit of a circle since then, I reckon, because I first listened to the words and I'd say, I don't know what I was singing about. I just was singing words, that's good together. And occasionally that sounds like it means this, or that sounds like it means this, but it was really just the sound of the words. But strangely enough, over the years, and and reanalyzing and looking at these lyrics, I'm thinking, wow, I think I was really trying to say something there. I had some deep-rooted emotional things that were coming out. Songs like "Stranger in Me," and they were heavy. His eyes, my God, what was I singing about? And and then it went on to be a cult classic with Friday the 13th.
I was going to say it went on to become a bit of a horror thing, but
yeah. So there was something within that was coming out, and I can see there's more to it than even I knew at the time. So yeah.
I mean, even a beat for you, a beat for you, Inside My Heart. I mean, that's some touching stuff there. I'm pretty sure there were plenty of guys that said, "I've got a song for you," to their girlfriend.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was, that song, it just came about with a beat. and then the opening riff. And so the beat for you made sense, because I just said, "Here, I've got this beat. I've got this beat for you in this song." And then I thought, well, that sounds good, like a beating heart. So then I started conjuring up this story about, some romantic interest. But it's funny how things start. The drum beat. There was another song that I must have heard, and it had this offset beat, and I really liked the way it was jumping around. And so I was doing, my interpretation of that beat. And then I think when I was listening to some early Japan stuff, I loved how they had like marimbas and percussive instruments. And then I happened upon this keyboard. It was a Yamaha DX7. It's also now a classic. And one of the sounds in there was this kind of vibraphone, woodblock white vibraphone sound.
Yeah.
And I was just running up and down the scales with it. And then I started kind of getting that, and I said, "Oh, that goes with this beat," and then I got all that disjointed beat going, and then it just fell into place. It's a simple song. It's just 4 chords.
I think David Bowie called that beat the syncopated rhythm. I think it was like that there was that rhythm that went up and down in the scales, but it was there. It was just out of kilter with everything else.
It's a bit out of whack, and then it finally comes in, and then it's just straight 4/4. So it gives it a very kind of juxtaposed intro to when it comes in.
Yeah. Now, it was a couple of years down the track, and you came up with album number 2, but you also went through a bit of a shift in terms of, the 2 Tonys left.
Yeah, it changed. That's right. Tony Lugton, he was a great starting point with Pseudo Echo. He was really good. But as we were maturing a bit as young men, so was our musical knowledge. And it was already a stretch for Tony. He's a guitarist. He's a great guitar player, but he was trying to play with stuff on keyboards, and it was hard. And as my knowledge with my songwriting was expanding, it was just becoming a challenge for everyone to be able to play what I was writing. And I would often write it and then put it into a sequencer and fix it up a bit, so I couldn't even play half of it if I had to play it live. And so it just got to that stage, and Tone was going off one way, we were going another way, and I could see that I wanted to go a bit more mainstream, a bit more commercial, because we were struggling with getting a bigger audience. We had this great cult audience that was really the new romantics of the time, but the mainstream wasn't really catching on yet. Maybe it was our look, our sound, something. And so with Love and Adventure, that was where we were heading. We were just expanding musically, and James Lee joined the band.
Yeah.
And Anthony was still hung in there actually on that album.
He played on the album and then left.
Yeah, he played the whole album,
yeah,
songs and everything. And Anthony didn't depart until we were touring the album, even though Vince was in a lot of the video clips, James's older brother. But it was Anthony who played or helped with the programming. It was more programming on that album than playing. First album was all live drumming, and then the second one we did a lot more. It was more fashionable to program it and make it sound programmed with the really fast kick drums and complex beats. But Anthony just basically fell to the pressures of touring. He didn't like to have to play it exactly like it was on the record. And, in the biz, you've got to really deliver. When you're getting to that level, you can't go, "Hey, we're going to just do this arty-farty version tonight." They want to hear the hit the way they hear it on the record. And so, Anthony stopped it out, basically. He just said, "Look, it's not what I want to do." And so we soldiered on, and as we have through the decades,
Yeah. And not only was there changes in the people in the band, but I've got to ask this: the hairstyle. When you first started out, it was very, very new romantic. I can only imagine how much hairspray you used, right? Then suddenly you came out with these long locks of hair, and it was
on the third album. That's right, on
the third album.
Yeah, well, that was kind of like reverting back to my teen years of my 70s, because that's what I looked like then. I had long hair. It's like Peter Frampton or David Cassidy or something.
Yeah.
So we were getting a little bit of pressure from management and the label to say, "Oh, look, Van Halen's making a comeback with new music, ZZ Top and Loverboy, and all these sort of rock bands were starting to come in, and Bon Jovi's exploding onto the scene." And so after the success of Love and Adventure, they were saying we need to rock it up a bit.
Yeah.
You know, and I was all for it because, like I said, that was my roots. And so I was going, fantastic. You know, I'm no stranger to rock. You know, this is my upbringing. And so we started to, you can hear it progress even on Love and Adventure album. Songs like Living in a Dream are obviously a bit more into the rock area. They're moving up, and then Funky Town, of course, it's just loaded with guitar. So I was happy about that because, you know, finally I was playing guitar again rather than just jangling around and sort of hiding behind the keyboards. Yeah. So when the race thing happened, they just said, you know, we want you to go this way. And what had happened is we toured so long with the Love and Adventure album. We toured Australia, then we toured Japan and America and Europe, and time's going by and we still haven't done another album. And so there probably should have been an album in between Love and Adventure and Race, which would have made more sense in the evolution of the sound. But because we were touring so much, it just became, the next album was this massive quantum leap sonically and direction-wise and image-wise too, because, you know, you're young, you jump on the latest fad and, you know, then it's spiky hair, then it's no hair, then it's long hair. So we're just jumping in, you know, and following along as you do when you're, you know, a youngster. And so, yeah, the songs on Race were a big shift. And there's also an internal bit of turmoil happening because as the Lee brothers, then there were the two brothers, and then there was a third brother, and they were getting involved in the writing as well then. Yeah. And that was kind of hard for me because it'd always been my baby and I'd been the primary songwriter. And so all of a sudden I was kind of pushed aside and given some songs and saying, hey, we're doing this and this and this. They were great songs they were submitting, but a lot of them weren't my lyrics or they weren't my melody style. So I was struggling a bit with doing these songs delivered to me. And that ended up being, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, yeah, when I listen back to it now, the record's a good album. It's a great record. But at the time, it was just a massive shock to our fans. And, you know, they didn't know what to think of it. You know, luckily over the years, it's become a fave again.
I don't think George and Ringo should have written songs either, to be honest. That probably broke up the Beatles too. So
yeah, it does happen. Sometimes, you know, you've got a formula and it's working. So, you know, why try and fix it isn't broken?
Yeah, yeah. Now, Funky Town. I mean, like it was the song really that I kind of feel like Funky Town was the song that really sort of broke you, you know, into the international scene. But it also came with its own problems, and that was how do you match it again?
How do you follow that up? I mean, 12 weeks at #1 in Australia alone. It was #1 in so many countries around the world. And, you know, sometimes you just kind of fluke it. It's not like we were, you know, engineering some, you know, master plan. I mean, the way that came about was just hysterical. Like, we go back to that venue that I used to go to where Molly DJ'd. Yeah. That's where I heard it the first time when I was 18 years old. And
lip sync.
I heard it again. That's right. And I heard it again while we were doing the Love and Adventure tour. So we were touring it around Australia, and a friend of mine who was a DJ, we were just having a coffee, and he put this vinyl on the turntable, said, remember this tune. Now, you got to remember when you're 20 odd, 5 years previous is real nostalgia. And so, you know, it seemed like, you know, ancient history. And he said, remember this song? And I just jumped. I said, oh, it's fantastic. I love that song. I used to listen to it all the time. And he's playing 12-inch of Funky Town and of the original. And so the next day or whatever it was, we're touring still, and I'm at a sound check, and I just start down that, and Pierre looked at me and I said, remember that song? We used to, you know, dance to it, listen to it at Molly's club. And then we started jamming. It was a bit hard to do in that key because it was sung by a female and it was really high. So we're sort of trying to work it out. And it ended up being so far away where I could sing it from the original key. I was going, I don't know whether to go this much lower or this much higher, but it's going to be in a completely different key. So by the time it ended up being in E on a guitar, which is just great power chord, the lowest part you can go on a guitar before they did the detuning. And I said, oh, okay, I'm going to play it here. And then the little dang it was really high, but the power chords were really low. just started jamming around. It's an easy song. It's just a couple of chords and it's got about 10 lyrics. And so we started jamming it. We always jammed at soundcheck. It was our favorite time to jam. And we're jamming around, and then we said, hey, let's put it in the set tonight. And so we got an encore, as we did during the tour, and we played Funky Town. It was a pretty close to the single version that ended up going. It was a bit looser and a bit more experimental and jammy, but and we jammed it, and we weren't sure how it would go. We just thought we're going to have fun with it anyway, and it just tore the roof down. Like, the place went nuts. So we said, that's staying in the set every night. That was the encore, Funky Town. So in those days, we shared our management office in South Melbourne with Eon FM, which became Split Enz.
Yes.
And so we'd often bump into people in the hallway, you know, when we're walking to our office and they're in their offices. And one day I see Lee Simons coming down the stairs in front of me. And he looks at me and he says, hey, Brian, you got to release that song. It's a smash. And I'm sort of looking at him. I had no idea what he was talking about, because I'm thinking, well, we just released Love and Adventure album. Yes. And I said, which song are you talking about? And he said, Funky Town. I said, how do you know we do that? He said, oh, I have my ways, you know. Somebody's giving me a dictate. And so he'd been hearing it, and he said, it's rocking, you know. And so I was so happy about that. So I said, go and tell that to Wheatley, because, you know, he might need some convincing. So, you know, Lee went in and talked to Glenn, and then Glenn sort of thinking about it, because he wasn't sure. We weren't sure we were going to record it even then. Yeah. And he said, you know, it's really got a stigma about being a disco song, and disco's dead. But he said, look, I can see it's going off when you're playing it live. So talked to the record company, and they weren't happy about it at all. They just said, no, that's a really uncool song. And the American record company absolutely they said, no way, man, that's dead in the water. Disco's gone. We don't want to remind them, you know. But I really started getting a vibe. I said, look, Lee's behind it. You know, the crowd's going nuts for it. We've got to do it. So I did really kind of take off with a bit of a rebel. And I said, I'm going to the studio anyway. We'll deal with who's paying for it, but I'm taking the band in. I'm going to produce it and do it. So I was a bit of a, you know, headstrong young man. And I did that. We didn't even have a producer. The producer who produced Love and Adventure had left the country by then. And so I just got the engineer that I used on the Love and Adventure album, Ian Mackenzie. I said, hey, Mac, we'll do this, just us. And I think I know what I want to do with it. So we took it in, spent a couple of days, you know, banging it down. Yeah. And ironically, it did have this big arty intro. And it was a bit like cross between, you know, Pink Floyd and Dire Straits' Money for Nothing.
Yeah.
It's just a big wanky intro, and we loved it. You know, it was really indulgent with all these sound effects, and then it finally just bursts into the big main riff. But when we were doing the extended version of it in the studio, we were cutting together all the various combinations of instruments, and one of the combos was just a kick drum.
Yeah. And
then there was a guitar part I was just jamming on at the end of the song, and it was kind of buried in the mix. I was actually pretending I was in ZZ Top, and I was kind of playing a half-assed version of Legs. Yeah. And sort of like this, and then started grooving, and I said, I'm putting that in the outro, and it was underneath. And then when we did this soloing up of the bass drum and that guitar part, it was just unanimous. We just went, holy crap, that's an intro right there. So we had it on the extended mix, but the next day we cut it off the extended mix, kept it on there, did a dupe of it, and then cut it onto the front of the radio version, the 7-inch, and then just ditched the big arty bit that we spent days doing. God knows where that ended up.
It'll be on an album somewhere.
And that became the intro. And then, you know, when we presented it, it was a real positive vibe. Everyone was really vibed. And then all of a sudden, the American record company, they could see it charting in Australia, and they heard it and they went, holy crap, you know. And they said, okay, let's go.
We made a mistake. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So pretty cool. They admitted that they maybe had a bit hasty decision on it, but then they got right behind it.
I think that there's always a song that becomes so iconic that it completely surpasses the band. You know, you think about, you know, Simple Minds, another new wave band. Don't You Forget About Me. I mean, it was a song that they didn't want to do, but okay, let's do it. But it became so big that it just
you got sometimes you know, go with it. You know, you can tell the song's good. There's no point fighting it and saying, oh, it's not exactly where we want to go or whatever, because, you know, without the hit, you might not go anywhere ever again. So, you know, as much as it was, you know, the last kind of big hit we had, that's why we're playing 40 years later still, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. 40 years. I mean, that's incredible. And during that time, you've broken up several times. You've gotten back together. You did another album 10 years later in 1999. You produced Chocolate Starfish, which I've got to say, to this day, is still one of my favorite albums of all time.
Oh, thank you.
You know, was it looking back across your life, you know, you've got these moments where of absolute brilliance. I mean, would you have known at the time when Chocolate Starfish first did the album and you produced it that it was going to be something that they pack out shows still to this day?
Yeah, I did have a good feeling. When I met them, they were a kind of a cover band, and then they were dabbling with original material. And I went to school with and grew up with a couple of the guys, and they were quite a bit younger than me. They were just little kids actually when I met them, and so they sort of looked to me as like the senior, and a bit of you know, wisdom that I had over them. So they asked me if I'd be interested in working with them in the studio and producing some stuff, and then they played me that song "You're So Vain," and I said, well, you know, it's another cover, but you know, you have to own it. I said, there's no point doing it like the original. We need to brand it so it's got something different. And funnily enough, I was thinking, I could hear the intro when they were playing it. I said, I think I need to turn it into kind of the weirdest thing that no one would expect. And in my head, I had Barry White in my head. I really did. I was with the Waka Chaka guitar and the moody intro and piano, and then it kicks into the rock song. And so it was a runaway success for them. So obviously they got me to do the next couple of albums, and it was one of those things, like we were all mates, and you know, we had a lot of fun, and it was ironic. I recorded it in the same studio that I recorded Autumnal Park in, and with the same label. They were on EMI with us too. So it was kind of nostalgic for me. It was a real trip, you know, to think, wow, I was here, you know, on this console, you know, doing my first ever record, and now I'm here producing a band that I've just had a national hit with, and in the next album, and so it was a real journey for me, and I felt like production might be where I want to go next, and that was when we took a fair hiatus with Pseudo Echo. So I was doing production.
You were still dabbling. I mean, I think you and Darren, the drummer, were from Chocolate Starfish, had a bit of a side project going.
Yes, with Brill. So Brill was something. It was a little independent project. I say little because there was no money behind it. It was just our own money, and we just did it on the side in a little studio, and it was just a bit of retro fun. You know, I went back to the almost to the 60s, and there was a lot of that sort of early Beatles and the Monkees and those sort of fun bands, and it was just another trip where I was going off in another direction to get some of my material and you know, rejig it and put it out. So I had something, and it was just a fun thing. We did a little bit of touring, and then we just left it at that. It's what it is, what it was. You know?
Yeah. And you're back now doing the Ultimate Tour. I think you've got the final couple of dates coming up. In Tassie.
Yeah, it's been epic.
Leave the best for last.
Yeah, really. Yeah, right on. So, you know, we've done 45 theatre dates so far, and it's been a real different level for the band. You know, big synchronized visuals and you know, lots of dynamics through the set and choreo, and a bigger band, a 6-piece band these days,
and a new drummer who's 19 years old.
Yeah, Abby, our saviour, we call her, because we went through 5 drummers on the Ultimate Tour alone. You know, there's a lot of dynamics in a band, and it's not just your ability. The personalities are a massive part of it, and you're going to spend a lot of time with people, and we all have different standards and ideas of where we want to go. And you know, the core band, we've known each other for many years, and we're really tight. We're like family. So it's hard getting an outsider in, and then, you know, it doesn't gel, and you're going, this isn't right. You know, we need people like us. And when we get the right people, it shows on stage. You know, you can really see the energy. And so we had so many people pull out at the last minute, crack under pressure or whatever it was, couldn't do it, and left us like literally with like 2 days before a show to learn a 2-hour set. And my wife, who is our manager, Raquel, had sort of she's always on the look for new musos, because you always need understudies in case somebody can't do a show. The show's got to go on, so you always need understudies. And so she'll always have her eye out for someone. And she'd been watching this young drummer, female drummer, and she showed me the clip and said, "This girl's great. You got to check her out." She looks so young in her videos. I'm going, "Oh my God, she's great, but Jesus, she looks like she's fresh out of school." I said, "But she's got a real style. I love how she's vibey." And I had to think about it. I said, "We haven't really had a female in the band. We've got a female backing vocalist, but not a muso. Not sure how it'll be received, but thought about it." And Rack had come back to me a few times and said, "I think you need to look at her again. She's great." And I think Rack wrote to her and said, "Would you be interested in auditioning?" And she was freaking out. She said, "I bought tickets to your show." She said, "I'm a big fan. My parents brought me up on Pseudo Echo." I said, "Wow, you're saying the right thing so far." And so we had been thinking about it. And then all of a sudden, this drummer pulls out again at the 11th hour, another one, cracks it under the pressure. Can't do it. Oh, I can't make it. It's like the gig is like in 2 days, and we cannot postpone it. We can't cancel it. It'll be catastrophic. People make plans and it's a big night out. They plan for months. We said, no, we can't cancel it, because everyone's going to be out of the gig and everyone's going to be disappointed and it won't look good. And we just have that motto, the show must go on. I said, we've got to get somebody, and it's got to be someone good. And then Raquel again, with the, how about Abby? I said, give her a call. And so we called her up and she said, "What do you think?" We got 2 days.
2 days.
And she just nailed it. I couldn't believe how well she had it together. The first gig, a couple of bits and pieces, but she just soldiered through. And, she was nervous as hell. She was crying after sound check because she was so overwhelmed. And, everyone just loved her and took her under their wing. And she really hit it with the band. The band just said, "She's one of us. She's staying." And she's just been a hit. She's...
Now, I won't keep up too much of your time. I have to ask, looking through your set lists that you've been doing over the tour, I'm one of those guys. I noticed that you do quite regularly "Send Me an Angel" by Real Life.
Yeah. Well, Real Life was also an influence to me, believe it or not, even though it's a local band. We just formed Pseudo Echo, and then I'd heard about this band, Real Life, and I remember checking them out and thinking, "Oh, fantastic." I just thought, God, it was great. Smoke machine and moving lights and things. And then I heard that song and I just thought, gee, this band's good, and the song was fantastic. It's probably my favorite 80s song. Like it's so good. Anyway, some years passed and decades go by, and I'm doing this 80s band that I put together, and I invited a few of the Kids in the Kitchen and the X-Men and the Wah-Wah-Nees, and I said, how about I put this band together and you guys come and sing your songs, and it's just going to be this, hits. Yeah. And everyone got on board, and David was part of that. And so it was kind of what became Pseudo Echo again, the band that I put together. It was half a Pseudo Echo and half just session guys. And we used to tour, and it was really successful. And then eventually it fell apart, too many egos, I guess. But it's hard, when there's one guy running the ship with a whole bunch of lead singers, it's a challenge.
That's fraught with danger. Yeah.
What could go wrong? And so the funny thing is I'd already had the band learn "Send Me an Angel," and I had all the sounds, and I just loved it so much, and I missed not playing it. And so I said to David, I think I'm going to play your song. And I said, hey, feel free to play Listening, Funky Town, in your set, because I'm going to play "Send Me an Angel." I just love it so much. So we already knew it, and we just put it in a show, and it went off. And I said, it's such a great song. And then it just became part of our set. And ironically, over the years, many people used to come up to me after a show or something and say, "Oh, I love your song. I love that song you did, Send Me an Angel," back in the 80s. And I'd have to say, actually, that was another band. But so I just said, it's ironic that people used to think it was Pseudo Echo. So I just said, you know what, this is great. We'll just play it. It's a good homage to a great band.
And the funny thing is, they were on the same management as what you were as well, with Glenn. Right. In fact, I think Glenn started the label for Real Life.
That's right. So there's a nice connection there, and it's good for everyone. It earns David a bit of APRA, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you get the promo out of it.
Yep, absolutely. Now, just in finishing, what are you listening to now? I always like to ask this and find out what you're listening to now.
Well, my son put me on to a couple of Belgian DJs, Fax and Morton Grinnell, and it's progressive. It's progressive, sort of trancey, and he was listening to some dreadful music for a while there, and I remember thinking, oh God, but I just got to let him listen to the music he listens to. And then one day he came over and I said, what are you listening to these days? And he said, oh, I'll play some stuff. He started playing me this stuff. I said, wow, I've got to say, it's really good. I said, the production's just mega. It's so tight and so good, and it's there's a lot of creativity going on. It's just not just mindless stuff. It's really good. So I was really getting into it, and then he called me up one night and said, I'm going out, and it's those guys that are DJing. So I went with him, and the oldest guy in the place by about 10 miles, but we loved it. We had a great time. Raquel and I were dancing around, and it was so good. So I've been listening to a lot of that. Also, I've been listening to a guy called Robert Parker. Robert's music is it's kind of that synth wave. It's like a reproduction of the 80s, and it's with current sounds or just groovier, more stomping drums and that than in the 80s. But the synths are very 80s, and the style. And one of the young singers that he utilizes different singers, because he's not a vocalist, I don't think. He's the programmer and writer. But he utilizes this guy, Preston Knight, his name is. He's a fantastic singer, got the most beautiful voice. And one of the tracks that he did on Robert's album is so good that I'm trying to contact Robert to see if he can work with us, or even Preston as well. Preston has commented on a couple of our Instagram, so there's a link there, and I'm going to follow it through because, they're just fantastic. Yeah,
I love it.
And prior to that, going back 5 years or so, I've probably listening to a bit of Kevin Parker's Tame Impala. I love what Kevin does.
Great band.
Yeah.
Great.
And once again, hear a lot of 80s undertones in there, and I love that. I get a real kick out of that when I hear music, and I think, wow, it's sort of like what we were doing, but twisting it around this way and that way. And then it's ironic because then that influences me again. So it's
the 80s, it's got this way of coming back around, hasn't it? The 80s, it doesn't matter, like even I think last year I was sitting there going, hang on a second, Kate Bush is number one, and Top Gun's number one on the films. Have I gone back to 1985 again?
Yeah, nuts. And I must say, there's another band I've been listening to. They come from Coburg, I believe, in Melbourne, and they're called Mild Life. And they are progressive, funky electronic. It's all early 80s, even late 70s. Minimal vocal, but nonetheless, beautiful vocal sound, like very much early David Gilmour sound, a bit of Dark Side of the Moon in there sometimes. But I'm astounded. These bands are just local bands, and they're so good. I'm just hearing it, just going, this is fantastic,
There's so much talent out there, isn't there? And there's nowhere for them to really go. Yeah,
I often wonder, and look, a lot of them, I guess these millennials, they're different to how we were. There's not so much rock stardom. It's just they sort of play the music, and they're kind of understated. There's not a lot of razzmatazz attached.
No.
And sometimes that's their undoing a bit. It's like, because I think people still want a bit of razzmatazz in music and entertainment. So maybe it'll be something that they'll progress into as they mature, or as they evolve through their journey. But
they make their money. They make their money getting clothing deals. So
So it's still great. I love to hear the influences, and it's nice that it influences me back.
Yeah, nice. Well, enjoy Tasmania next week, Friday and Saturday, and the dates are on your website, which is still, I think, pseudoecho.net, is it?
That's right, pseudoecho.net. Yeah.
Brilliant, excellent. Brian Canham, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Pleasure
Been
chatting.
an absolute pleasure. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Long Way to the Top. Hit plus or follow to subscribe to the podcast, and head over to Facebook at the Long Way to the Top podcast and give us a like. Keep on rocking, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Long Way to the Top.